Larry stared out the large window of his mansion, watching the city lights sparkle like stars on the ground, the room filled with rare pieces of art and furniture that could easily belong in a museum reflected his undeniable success. Yet that night it all felt hollow. The echo of his achievements no longer fulfilled him. In his trembling hands an old photograph captured at Christmas from many years ago. Timothy, still a young boy, hugged him with an innocent smile. He closed his eyes, trying to push away the ache in his chest. "I failed him, didn't I?" Larry murmured, unaware that the butler had entered the room. "Sir, may I say something?" the man asked cautiously. Larry merely nodded. "You did everything you could, but sometimes people need to learn on their own." Those words, though well-meaning, did little to lift the burden. Larry knew he had a decision to make. Timothy, his only heir, was destroying everything he had spent a lifetime building. When Timothy came into the picture, the contrast was stark. Young, handsome, and charismatic, he seemed to have all the makings of an ideal successor, yet his life was a constant parade of parties and excess. One evening, Larry decided to confront him. "Timothy, we need to talk." The young man looked at his father with boredom, putting his phone down on the table. "Dad, if this is about money again, I'm not in the mood for lectures." Larry took a deep breath. "This isn't just about money, it's about responsibility, about your future." But Timothy rolled his eyes and left the room, muttering, "My future is fine, Dad, better than yours." Those words felt like a dagger. Larry sank into his leather chair, staring at the emptiness ahead. Days later, during a meeting with his lawyer, he finally said what he had been postponing for months: "I want to remove Timothy from my will." The lawyer stared at him, surprised. "Are you sure about this, Larry?" "Your only son." Larry hesitated before answering. "Not the boy I once knew. I can't allow him to destroy everything." That same night, Timothy returned to the mansion to retrieve something. He found Larry in the library, surrounded by papers. "What's all this?" he asked suspiciously. Larry looked up. "Exhausted documents, Timothy. I'm making changes." The young man approached quickly, scanning the papers. "You can't do this. You can't cut me off." Larry remained silent. "This isn't fair, Dad." Timothy shouted, his voice trembling. "I'm your son," Larry responded firmly, "and that's precisely why I'm doing this. Maybe it'll wake you up to reality." After Timothy stormed out, Larry was left alone. He remembered a distant night when Timothy was still a child. They were in the living room together, decorating the Christmas tree. Timothy laughed as he placed a star on top. "One day, will this house be mine?" he had asked. Larry replied with a smile, "Yes, son, but only if you learn to take care of it now." That promise seemed as distant as the stars Timothy once admired. The screech of tires on asphalt pierced the night. As Timothy sped through the city, the street lights blurred into streaks of light. But none of it seemed to matter. His mind was trapped in Larry's decision, echoing like relentless thunder. "He actually cut me off after everything, after promising I was the heir," he muttered to himself. His grip on the steering was so tight that his knuckles turned white. The mansion, the fortune, the legacy, everything he believed was his birthright, had been ripped away without warning. He recalled his father's words, cold and resolute. "It's for your own good, Timothy," Larry had said without even flinching. "My own good? What kind of father does this to his son?" Timothy shouted, his voice drowned out by the roar of the engine as he pushed the car even harder. But no matter how fast he drove, he couldn't escape the overwhelming sense of betrayal. After hours of aimless wandering, Timothy turned into a dark alley far from the bustling streets. He shut off the car, leaving only the faint sound of a distant siren to break the silence. Resting his head against the steering wheel, he took deep breaths, trying to calm the storm inside him. But he couldn't. He grabbed the phone from the passenger seat, and after hesitating for a few seconds, finally dialed a number. The line rang twice before a deep voice answered. "Timothy, what do you want at this hour?" It was Randy, the mechanic in charge of Larry's private plane. Timothy pressed the phone tightly to his ear. "Randy, I need you to do something big." The silence on the other end was broken by a short, raspy laugh. "Big like what you know? Messing with your dad's plane isn't cheap." Timothy leaned forward, his voice low and filled with determination. "I don't care about the cost. It needs to look like an accident." Can you do it? Randy sighed, and Timothy could hear him fiddling with tools in the background. Listen, kid, I'm a mechanic, not a magician. But if you want something to go wrong with that plane, I can make it happen. It's going to cost you a lot. Timothy closed his eyes for a moment before responding. Money's not an issue, Randy. Just do what I'm asking. His voice carried a coldness. Even he didn't recognize. All right, kid. But listen, Randy replied, now more serious. This isn't like changing the oil on a car. We're talking about tampering with a flight system. I'll need time. And you need to keep your mouth shut. Timothy let out a humorless chuckle. The only thing you need to know is that the old man boards the plane in 2 days. That's all the time you've got. The mechanic gave another short laugh. Sounds like someone's in a hurry. Consider it done. Timothy hung up and tossed the phone onto the seat beside him. He sat there in the stillness of the alley, staring into the void ahead. Part of him was terrified by what he had just set in motion, but another part justified every step. He left me no choice, he whispered to himself, as if trying to convince his own conscience. If he wants to erase me from his legacy, then he's the one who's going to disappear. As the night wore on, Timothy remained in the alley, unmoving. The anger still bubbled in his chest, but now it was accompanied by something else, determination. He knew there was no turning back. The clock was ticking, and Randy was already working on the plan. Leaning against his car, Timothy smirked in satisfaction. As he slipped his phone into his pocket in the quiet of the alley, he seemed to savor his supposed victory. The cold night didn't bother him. The feeling of control, of being one step ahead, warmed him from within. 2 days, and all of this will be mine, he muttered to himself, as if toasting his own cunning. He glanced around the shadows of the alley, confident that no one would ever discover what he had just planned. But Timothy had no idea that a few feet away, hidden behind stacks of cardboard boxes, Amanda was listening with wide eyes and a pounding heart. She was just a street girl, accustomed to blending into the background and vanishing from sight. That night, the alley had been her refuge from the relentless cold, but it had transformed into the stage for something far bigger and far more dangerous. Her breath caught in her throat, and she could barely process what she had just overheard. Timothy's words echoed in her mind, vivid and terrifying. I wanted to look like an accident. Randy, he gets on the plane, and the plane doesn't come back. Amanda swallowed hard, recalling the cold, commanding tone in his voice. Who was Randy? She understood it had something to do with a mechanic, but the most chilling part was the revelation about the target. The planes at the city airport. Larry Stone will board. And you can't mess this up. That name, Amanda had seen it in headlines while wandering the city. Powerful man, owner of a vast fortune. But what shook her to her core was Timothy's plan to kill his own father. Amanda hugged her knees to her chest, trying to stop her body from trembling so violently. She knew she had to act. It was a terrible plan, something no one should ignore. But how could she stop something so immense? I'm just a nobody, she thought, biting her lip. Who would listen to me? Who would believe me? Fear gripped her, freezing her in place. What if Timothy saw her? He clearly wouldn't hesitate to do anything to protect his plan. Timothy stood still speaking to himself. 2 days, he repeated, as if convincing himself that it was enough time. He got into his car, but didn't start the engine. Immediately, Amanda watched him cautiously, barely breathing, terrified that he might notice her presence. But Timothy appeared utterly self-assured, unable to imagine that anyone could have overheard everything. When he finally started the car and drove out of the alley, Amanda exhaled the breath she had been holding, the sound escaping like a muffled cry of relief. Left alone again, Amanda stayed frozen for a few moments, trying to process what she should do. Her world had always been simple: survive, find food, a warm place to sleep, avoid trouble. But what she had just heard was impossible to ignore. If I don't do something, that man will die, she thought, a lump forming in her throat. It was terrifying to think of facing someone like Timothy, but she knew she didn't have a choice. Amanda grabbed her backpack, slinging it over her trembling shoulders. Her feet began to move, even though she was shaking. All she knew was that she had to warn Larry Stone somehow. Amanda knew exactly what she needed to do. The airport was miles away, and she had only 2 days to get there. 2 days to save a life. Timothy's words still echoed in her mind. 2 days, he boards the plane, and the plane doesn't come back. The urgency burned in her chest, but fear whispered that it might be impossible. She was just a street girl with nothing but an old backpack and the determination to keep going. As she left the alley where she had overheard the conversation, Amanda began walking east, the only direction she knew would lead to the airport. The dark, deserted streets made her quicken her pace, constantly looking over her shoulder, as if Timothy might appear at any moment. The cold was relentless, the biting wind making her cheeks sting. Each step felt heavier than the last. But she couldn't stop, not now. As the city woke up, Amanda's journey became even more challenging. The wealthy neighborhoods with their mansions and tree-lined streets quickly gave way to bustling avenues filled with honking cars and hurried voices. With no money, she avoided stores and diners, but the hunger gnawed at her stomach. "I can't think about that now," she murmured to herself, clutching her coat tighter. Her focus had to remain on one thing: reaching the airport before it was too late. The journey seemed endless. Amanda crossed neighborhoods she had never seen before, each presenting new obstacles. On one crowded street, a man in a rush bumped into her, knocking her to the ground. "Hey, watch where you're going," he snapped without offering help. Amanda didn't respond. She picked up her backpack and kept walking, swallowing the urge to cry. There was no time for self-pity. Every minute lost was another chance for Larry Stone to die. That night, the cold intensified, and Amanda found shelter in an abandoned bus station. She curled up in a corner, using her backpack as a pillow, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind was full of doubts. How would she reach Larry? How could she convince someone so powerful that he was in danger? She was just a nobody. But amidst those thoughts, a determination began to grow. She might not have much, but she had courage, and that would have to be enough. The next morning, Amanda woke with the first rays of sunlight streaming into the station. Her legs ached, and her feet were covered in blisters, but she forced herself to stand. The airport was still miles away, and time was running out. As she walked through the city's outskirts, she began to notice signs pointing toward the airport. "I'm getting closer," she thought, feeling a pang of relief mixed with anxiety. But the final stretch wouldn't be easy. The last leg of the journey required crossing a busy highway. Cars sped by at breakneck speed, and the noise was deafening. She waited for a gap in the traffic and sprinted as fast as she could, her heart pounding in her chest. When she reached the other side, she collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily. "Almost there," she whispered, trying to gather her strength to keep moving. Every step felt like a victory, but also a struggle. When Amanda finally spotted the airport in the distance, a wave of emotions washed over her. She was exhausted, hungry, and in pain, but the sight of her destination gave her renewed energy. With the sun already setting, she knew she had to plan her next move. Getting to the airport wasn't enough. She had to find Larry Stone and convince him of the imminent danger. Without wasting another moment, Amanda quickened her pace, determined to complete her journey before it was too late. Amanda entered the airport with her heart racing, her legs trembling from exhaustion and fear. Everything around her seemed to move too fast as she, tired and disheveled, tried to blend into the luxurious environment. Travelers hurried by, pulling suitcases, while she, clutching her battered backpack, desperately searched for a face she only knew from newspapers and TV commercials. Larry Stone. He was somewhere in this vast building, and Amanda had to find him before it was too late. After what felt like hours, but were mere minutes, she spotted him. Tall, with impeccable posture, Larry stood surrounded by assistants and security personnel exuding authority. A chill ran down Amanda's spine. How could someone like her approach a man like him? And worse, how could she convince him that he was in danger? But there was no time to dwell on that now. His life depended on her words. Taking a deep breath, she ran toward the group, ignoring the wary glances of passers-by. "Mr. Stone, please wait," Amanda shouted, her voice echoing in the airport vast hall. Two security guards immediately stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Hold on, young lady, you can't just approach like that," one of them said firmly. Amanda struggled, trying to break free. "Please, it's an emergency. He's in danger." Her voice carried such urgency that it caught Larry's attention. He stopped walking and slowly turned, narrowing his eyes in suspicion. "Who are you?" Larry asked, his deep voice full of authority. He studied her for a moment, clearly trying to make sense of the dirty, desperate girl standing before him. Amanda seized the chance and stepped forward, ignoring the guards trying to hold her back. "I overheard something, sir, something terrible. Your plane, it's been sabotaged to crash." Her words tumbled out quickly, dripping with desperation. But Larry's reaction was a mix of disbelief and irritation. "That's absurd," he said, raising a hand to cut her off. "I don't know who you are, or what you think you know. But I don't have time for this. He turned to leave, heading toward the hangar. Panic rose in Amanda's chest. She couldn't let him walk away. Please believe me, she cried, her voice nearly breaking. You'll die if you get on that plane. Larry hesitated for a moment, but didn't turn back. I've heard enough stories, he said coldly, taking his first step away. Then Amanda played her last card, shouting in near desperation, "It was your son, Timothy. He planned everything." The words cut through the air like a thunderclap. Larry stopped immediately. The silence that followed was almost palpable. He slowly turned, his eyes now filled with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "What did you say?" Larry asked, his voice low but tense. Amanda took a deep breath, feeling tears stream down her face. "I heard everything. He hired a mechanic, Randy, to sabotage your plane. He wants it to look like an accident so he can take your inheritance. I swear it's the truth." Each word felt like it was being torn from her soul, but she knew she had to keep going. "He said you wouldn't come back alive." Larry seemed frozen, his expression a mask of disbelief. "That's impossible," he murmured, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his denial. His assistants and security guards exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do. Amanda took another step forward, her eyes pleading. "Please, just check the plane. You don't have to believe me now, but check. If I'm wrong, you can send me away. But if I'm right..." She let the sentence trail off, unable to say the rest. For a moment that felt eternal, Larry remained silent. Finally, he lifted his head and signaled to his security team. "Bring her with me," he ordered, his voice now firm. "I want everything inspected immediately." Amanda felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she knew the most difficult part was still ahead. She followed him as he headed to the hangar, her palms sweaty and her heart pounding. In the hangar, the mechanics were instructed to perform a full inspection of the plane. Amanda watched intently, her eyes fixed on Larry, who maintained a stoic expression, though his eyes betrayed a hint of worry. When one of the mechanics finally approached him, the tension in the air was nearly unbearable. "Mr. Stone," the man began hesitantly, "we found something unusual in the fuel systems. Someone tampered with it to cause a failure mid-flight." The mechanic's words hit Larry like a blow. He closed his eyes for a moment, shaking his head as if trying to push away the weight of what he had just heard. Amanda stayed silent, knowing this wasn't her moment to speak. When Larry finally opened his eyes, he looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and pain. "If it weren't for you," he paused, then continued, his voice heavy with emotion, "you saved my life. I don't know how to thank you for that." Truly, tears welled up in Amanda's eyes. But this time they were different. They weren't born of fear, but of relief and recognition. Larry took a deep breath, still visibly shaken, but his expression carried a newfound resolve. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'll handle this now, and most importantly, I'll make sure to take care of you." As they left the hangar together, Amanda felt for the first time truly seen, even though she had no idea what would come next. She knew she had done the right thing. Larry returned to his mansion with Amanda by his side, the weight of his discovery still heavy on his shoulders. The usually serene and immaculate environment felt suffocating. The elegant lights and luxurious furnishings couldn't mask the tension hanging in the air. Larry was about to face the bitterest truth of his life, the betrayal of Timothy, his only son. Amanda, though still fearful, felt she had to be there. She had carried this truth alone until now, and couldn't abandon Larry at this moment. "Stay close to me," Larry said to Amanda as they entered. His voice was firm, but carried a protective tone. Amanda hadn't expected. She nodded, clutching her backpack as if it were a shield, while they walked down the hallway toward the office where Timothy usually spent his evenings. As they approached the slightly open door, they heard soft music playing and the clink of a glass being set on the desk. Timothy was inside, oblivious to the storm about to erupt. Larry pushed the door open forcefully, making it slam against the wall. Timothy looked up, startled, but his face quickly shifted to irritation. "Dad, what's the meaning of this? And why did you bring that?" he sneered at Amanda, who instinctively shrank back. Larry ignored the remark and took a few steps forward, his eyes locked on his son. "I know everything, Timothy." His voice was as cold as marble, though every word carried an open wound. Timothy let out a short, nervous laugh. "Know everything. I don't know what you're talking about." He picked up the glass from the desk and took a sip, trying to appear confident. Larry didn't budge. "Stop it. I've already inspected the plane. We found what you and Randy did." The glass slipped from Timothy's hand, spilling its contents onto the expensive rug. He tried to mask his shock, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. "You're accusing me of sabotage. That's ridiculous, ridiculous." Larry stepped closer, his voice rising. "You were going to kill me, Timothy, your own father, for what the Dan inheritance. Is that it?" Amanda watched silently, trying to disappear into the background. But feeling the gravity of the moment, Timothy, now cornered, rose from his chair, pointing a finger at his father. "You never gave me a choice. It was always about your money, your legacy. And me, I'm just another piece in your trophy case. Aren't I something to show the world how perfect you are?" Larry felt the words hit him like a punch to the gut. "You think that justifies what you did? You could have talked to me, Timothy. We could have worked things out. But instead you chose this." His voice faltered, revealing the emotional exhaustion. He felt Timothy exploded in anger, pointing at Amanda. "And now you believe her, a street girl? Dad, don't be naive. She probably made all of this up to get something from you." "Enough," Larry shouted, his voice echoing through the room. Amanda flinched, but Timothy stopped mid-sentence, stunned by his father's intensity. "She saved my life. Well, you, my own son, tried to take it. You want to talk about trust, about ingratitude? Look at yourself." Larry stepped back, running a hand through his graying hair, as if trying to find the right words. "I wanted so badly to believe you were still the boy who placed the star on the Christmas tree with me. But I don't recognize you anymore." Timothy lowered his gaze for a moment, but quickly looked up again, his eyes brimming with tears. He tried to hide with arrogance. "You never really saw me, Dad. It was always the empire first, then you, me. I've always been last." The words hung in the air, and for a moment silence enveloped the room. Larry didn't know how to respond. He turned to Amanda, who watched with apprehension, and felt a crushing wave of sadness. Amanda timidly finally spoke. "He's sorry, at least a little, but that doesn't erase what he tried to do. You need to decide what to do now." Larry nodded, his eyes still fixed on Timothy. "You committed a crime, Timothy," he said, his voice now calm but full of pain. "And crimes have consequences." The tension in the room was nearly unbearable, the air seeming charged with electricity. Amanda knew that whatever decision Larry made would change all their lives forever. While Timothy remained silent, Larry struggled with the pain and disappointment. He knew he had to do what was right, but that didn't make it any less devastating. The silence in the stone mansion was oppressive, as though the very air was weighted with tension. Larry was still in the study, where everything had unfolded just moments before. Timothy sat on the leather couch, a mixture of restrained anger and despair on his face, while Amanda watched from a corner of the room, trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible. The atmosphere was suffocating. Larry, with his hands resting on the desk, took deep breaths, as if summoning the strength to make the hardest decision of his life. "Timothy," Larry began, turning slowly toward his son. His voice was grave, no longer filled with anger, but with profound sadness. "You've left me no choice." Timothy looked up, his eyes wide, and took a step forward. "Dad, no, you can't do this. I was angry. It was a mistake." His voice trembled, and desperation started to seep through his tone. Larry shook his head, a gesture filled with disbelief and pain. "A mistake, Timothy, a mistake." His breaking something in a moment of frustration. This was a plan to take my life." He took a deep breath, his eyes glistening with tears. He struggled to hold back. "And if Amanda hadn't warned me, you would have succeeded." Those words lingered in the air, like a sentence silencing any attempt at justification. Timothy might have offered. Larry picked up the phone on the desk and dialed with trembling hands. "Chief Richards," he said, his voice now firm. "I need a team at my residence immediately. It's an emergency hearing." Timothy rushed toward his father, trying to stop him. "Dad, no, please, I'm your son," he shouted. But the mansion security guards intervened, holding him by the arms. Amanda averted her gaze, her heart aching, as she watched Timothy's desperation. But she knew this was the only thing Larry could do. "Son or not, Timothy," Larry continued, looking directly at him, "you must face the consequences of your actions." He hung up the phone, his hands still shaking, and leaned on the desk for support. Timothy began to struggle against the guards, shouting, "You don't understand. I did this. Because you were never there for me, you always chose your damn fortune over me. The words came out like daggers piercing Lar, who stood still, his eyes filled with an indescribable sorrow. I failed you, Timothy. Larry admitted, his voice low, almost a whisper. But that doesn't justify what you tried to do. He turned to the security guards. Keep him here until the police arrive. Timothy, tears streaming down his face, stopped resisting. Dad, he murmured. But Larry didn't respond. He looked toward Amanda, who watched him with a mix of fear and solidarity. You were braver than I could have ever imagined, Larry said sincerely. And I thank you for that. A few minutes later, the sound of sirens announced the arrival of the police. Amanda stepped away from the entrance as officers entered the mansion. Chief Richards, a burly, serious man, greeted Larry with a curt nod. We got your call, Miss Stone. We're here to proceed as needed. Larry nodded back, though it seemed as if every word weighed heavily on him. The suspect is over there, he said, gesturing toward Timothy. Two officers approached and handcuffed Timothy, who now looked utterly defeated. He didn't resist, but before being taken away, he turned to his father. You're handing me over to strangers, Dad. Is that it? Is this